Biden taps Kamala as VP. Second round of looting in Chicago. Portland is saying they're not going to prosecute a lot of riot crimes. General Flynn's still stuck in court, and a horrific murder the media is not telling you about. Welcome to the Buck Sexton Show, everybody. Thank you for being here. I know there was that big announcement last night. Turns out I was right. I told you Kamala was going to be the VP. None of this Susan Rice stuff that I was hearing. I knew it was going to be Kamala. And now we have at least a few news cycles where we're going to hear about how, from the liberal media, this is an inspired choice and this is moving America in historic and amazing new directions and all this stuff. And I want you to forget a couple of basic truths here. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, in a sense, are perfect for each other as president and vice president on a ticket, because Biden is the Democrat at the top of the ticket who has been repeatedly and clearly denied by his own side. Right? He ran in 88. He ran in 2007. He has been running for president for decades. He didn't run in 2016 cycle because Hillary was just more compelling to Democrats. No one really thinks that this guy's a great candidate. And I'm talking about Democrats. But he's their panic move. He's the best they've got. So they're going to pretend that we don't know what they really think of him. Same thing with Kamala Harris. She was the favorite of the media, even more so than Beto O'Rourke. Makes me sad. She was the favorite of all of the national press corps. And she had to drop out because she ran out of funds before there was even one Democrat primary. Because people in the Democrat voting ranks didn't like her. Nothing about her particularly compelling. She is that classic prosecutor who has been using the power of the office to advance herself and now transitioned into a political career. And I've always warned you about this. Highly ambitious prosecutors should be watched. They're not all bad. There are some very good ones. But highly ambitious prosecutors are a cause for concern. I want people working in prosecutorial ranks, generally speaking, who that's their lane, not who are thinking, how can I use this office to become popular enough to be a senator or a president? Although I know it's a common track. People become, but you got to watch them. You never can really trust that the politics weren't somehow infused into prosecutorial decisions, which should not be happening. But Kamala is not really going to change very much, I think, for where we are in this race. I know people are claiming that Trump is now really running against Kamala Harris. No, Trump is just running against the Democrat Party. Biden, Kamala, doesn't matter. As I've been telling you, whether it's Biden or a sack of potatoes, it's not Trump. It's a Democrat. It's somebody that will do the Democrat establishment's bidding, and that's all that really matters. If we want to have a little fun with this, though, it is worth taking a trip down memory lane for what did Kamala Harris think of Joe Biden before she was given the opportunity to be at the bottom of his presidential ticket. What was she thinking about? Well, here's Kamala Harris talking, and this was her biggest moment. You remember this during the Democrat debates. Her biggest moment that the media was all so excited about, where she didn't call Joe Biden a racist, but she said, you're kind of a racist. Play clip 2.
I do not believe you are a racist, and I agree with you when you commit yourself to the importance of finding common ground. But I also believe, and it's personal, and I was actually it was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. And it was not only that, but you also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
So you're not a racist, Joe Biden, because that's an epithet that we only reserve for Republicans in politics in this country. But you're like a little bit, you got a little bit of a racist vibe sometimes. You supported segregationists. You were opposed to busing. That was the biggest slam on Biden that anybody had during all the debates, other than Biden looking kind of confused and, yeah, I'm just going to be yelling here on the stage. I'm just sort of saying stuff real loud. And Kamala went after him. She also said that she believed Joe Biden's sexual assault accusers. So when it suits her, Kamala Harris is happy to attach herself to and to be advocating for a guy who she thinks may very well be guilty of sexual assault and is kind of a racist. But, I mean, power is power. Right? And we know Kamala likes power. We know she likes to elevate herself and is willing to attach herself to powerful people to do so. Now, you also have some of the downsides for Democrats, immediate downsides for them of having somebody who's been a career, not just a career prosecutor, but really built her reputation on locking people up for pretty minor stuff in the grand scheme of things. Right? And now I understand there's a bit of a dissonance here. As Republicans, we want tough on crime policies, but Kamala wasn't tough on the kind of crimes that we wanted her to be tough on. She was just kind of making it up as she went along based on what was good for her political aspirations at that moment. And you know who took her to task? And you know, I had so many of you writing me during the primaries like, Buck, stop all your fanboy stuff over Tulsi. I'm not a Tulsi fanboy. She's a socialist, really, but I kind of like her. You know, look, sometimes I can kind of like I wish they weren't socialists, but I can kind of like a socialist, you know. Aloha Tulsi. But she had the biggest moment of her debate season against Kamala Harris, specifically on how Kamala Harris was willing to really lock people. She was the district attorney for San Francisco, and then was the state attorney general, and then became the senator, took over Barbara Boxer's seat. And when she was in the role of making decisions that disproportionately affect the incarceration of members of the black and brown community, she was all about locking people up, lock them up. And that's interesting given where the Democrats are now. But Tulsi Gabbard called her out, you remember, during the debates. Play one.
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. That would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place. That impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Now, I'm going to tell you, I think that bail is important, and we've seen that in New York. So it's not that I agree necessarily with all of Tulsi's criticisms of Kamala, although if you're a prosecutor and you know someone's innocent and you don't march down to the jail yourself and let them out. I mean, if you allow someone that you know to be innocent to suffer in prison, you're a horrible human being. It's worse than even just you're bad at your job. You're a horrible human being. You're a disgrace. You're disgusting. So if that's true, that's really all you need to know about Kamala Harris. We'll get into the marijuana arrest situation in a moment, but the Democrat Party is the cops are bad, let's let people loot and riot party now. But they're elevating somebody who's built a whole career. In fact, Joe Biden's proudest legislative moment was probably the Biden crime bill, which was a tough on crime bill, which sent people to prison for longer periods of time. Now he's repudiated that, but he's got Kamala Harris, who's also built a reputation for sending people to prison for longer periods of time, for being more strict within the confines of the law. Oh, and also some horrific political targeting, which I'll get into in a moment. I haven't forgotten about that either. But the Democrats are just going to pretend that none of that matters. It doesn't, as I've said, it doesn't really. We could talk about the record, and we will. and talk about the policies. And of course, that's our obligation. But it's just generic Democrat against Donald Trump. It is the left-wing mob against Donald Trump and the Republican Party. That is this election in 2020 encapsulated. That's the whole thing. So the specifics, while they're interesting to us, I'm not sure they really move the needle that far one way or the other. Here is Kamala on a radio show talking about how, she smoked weed in college and all kinds of stuff. Play clip 3.
So there are a lot of reasons why we need to legalize.
Have you ever smoked?
I have.
Okay. Like in
And
college?
I inhaled. I did inhale.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. But yes.
I know you have to go. They say you have to go. I just wanted to
I
ask.
just broke news.
I mean, was it in college?
Uh-huh.
See, I like stuff like that. That's a real honest
It's
answer.
real.
Was it a blunt or joint?
It was a joint.
Hey.
Yeah.
You remember the high?
I do.
So if it was legalized all throughout the country and medicinal, would you, do it?
Listen, I
again?
think that it gives a lot of people joy, and we need more joy.
We need more joy in this world.
Now, I'm opposed to marijuana. I think it's bad. I think it's bad for you. I think it's harmful to society. But I'm not in favor of locking people up for certainly for using it. I'm not in favor of ruining people's lives for being in possession of marijuana or even selling small amounts of marijuana. But Kamala Harris was very strict when she was in a role where she got to determine how long people would go away and what kind of charges they would face, what kind of deals they'd get. Prosecutors have tremendous power. I mean, in many ways, they have the greatest authority over American citizens of any government official. The only thing that really comes close is the IRS, but even the IRS eventually has to rely on prosecutors to do their nastiest work. So the prosecutor's writ, the prosecutor's reach is something that we should all be very wary of. And Kamala Harris used it for partisan ends. Kamala Harris would laugh about marijuana in an interview when she wants people to like her, but was locking people up for marijuana when she was the district attorney in San Francisco in a way that was in excess of her predecessors. You could at least put it that way. But the most troubling thing that she did, I don't even know I can't say the most troubling. There's a lot of troubling things she's done. But I've got a few of them for you. One, she was the state attorney general who sent about almost a dozen agents of the state of California, law enforcement officers, to go ransack the house of David Daleiden, who was the guy behind the videos of the Planned Parenthood selling of baby parts, which was a real video, that was true. And that has been erased from the media memory banks. Planned Parenthood was doing what the Center for Medical Progress was saying that they were, or Center for Medical Ethics, whatever it was, saying they were doing. All right. They have it all on tape. Kamala Harris went after them. She criminalized undercover journalism because Planned Parenthood is sacred to the Democrat Party, and they will unleash the full fury of the state on you for the PR reasons of Planned Parenthood, right? Just so you can't make Planned Parenthood look bad. She was willing to criminalize undercover journalism, say that it was violation of wiretapping laws. Oh, so you can't actually do any of these shows where the people go and they expose wrongdoing, right? You've got journalists who have been doing this for decades. Oh, that's illegal now in California? This is absurd. But she needed the money. She wanted the support and donations of Planned Parenthood and the Democrat Party, and so she used her power for that in a partisan fashion. It was unjust, it's disgusting, and she did it. But in some ways, the one that really sticks out even more for me, perhaps because it's more recent, Kamala Harris was in some ways, the most aggressive and the most aggressively stupid, too, questioner of Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, the way she went after Brett Kavanaugh, she believed Julie Swetnick. Oh, and she also believed Jussie Smollett. Thought that was almost like a modern-day lynching, she called it, or attempted lynching, something like that. I knew, and you who listen to the show know, that Jussie Smollett was lying pretty much from day one. I was like, this guy's not telling the truth. This is ridiculous. She believed him, or at least she said she did. So what does that say about her judgment? She believed Julie Swetnick, who even the people I know who believed the initial accuser against Kavanaugh understand that that's just, the Swetnick allegations were absurd. That was insane. And it probably saved Kavanaugh's nomination. But she believed those insane allegations. And she also tried to entrap Kavanaugh with some, did you ever have a conversation with a law firm thing about this under oath? I mean, she was desperate to get her 5 minutes of additional play on MSNBC by destroying Kavanaugh's life. So she's an unethical person. She is incredibly ambitious in a way where everything else is secondary. All other people, all other interests. It's all about Kamala. And if I'm Joe Biden, I got to think this is somebody who will push me aside. And, the moment Joe Biden, hurts his hip, Kamala steps into the role. Guess what? It's going to be President Kamala, my friends, in all but name. I can't believe we're losing our home that we didn't even sell. That's what Deborah said when she found out that she was the victim of home title theft. This is a crime that can actually cost you your home. The FBI is trying to raise the alarm all across the country about this. Here's how it works. The bad guys find your home's information online. Then they forge your signature stating that you sold your home to them. You often won't find out about this until the eviction notice arrives. And the usual identity theft protection services don't actually protect you. You need to go with Home Title Lock. Home Title Lock creates a virtual barrier around your home's title. Simply go to HomeTitleLock.com and use promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. You can also check to see if you're a victim of this crime and don't even know it yet. Again, HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. That's HomeTitleLock.com, promo code BUCK. But what did the media say about this generally broadly anticipated announcement yesterday of Kamala Harris? And what did the Democrat Party say? Well, here's the media. Here's Joy Reid, has her own show now at MSNBC, still hasn't found the hackers who broke into her website from 10 years ago to say homophobic things. I'm wondering when that's going to happen. But play clip 10.
I'm proud of Joe Biden, I have to say, as a man of his generation, to be the anti-Trump today, to be the anti-Trump and to affirm black women in this way on this day with the president that's in there now. This could not be a better selection. He's taken us back to the start. She was always the most logical choice. He did a lot of searching, he did a lot of research, and he came right back to where he really should have always been. I think this is a great day for this country.
A great day for the country. Of course. That's what the libs would say about this. This is the only injection of enthusiasm that they've had in an otherwise very boring and almost non-existent political campaign by Joe Biden. And if you haven't already, you got to see the cover of the New York Times that's been floating around from the aftermath of the initial pick, where it's hagiography. I mean, it's Kamala Harris, the saint of American politics, front page, beautiful photograph, huge thing. And you see the comparison of it with when Mike Pence was announced by Trump. It was like, bottom right of the page. It looked like where they should have an ad for sleep apnea machines or something. Instead, there's Vice President or Mike Pence tapped as Vice President, blah, blah, blah. Nothing. I know media bias is so present that after a while you start to get tired even pointing it out. But this was particularly absurd. I mean, this was truly outrageous. We'll talk about all this and much more coming up here in just a moment with the Attorney General of the United States. That's right. Bill Barr is joining us, my friends. You've heard me talk about him many times. I think he's absolutely critical, not just to the rule of law in general in this country, but also to getting answers about specific violations of the rule of law and then specific undermining of our institutions like the Russia collusion probe, the persecution of General Flynn. So we have the Attorney General of the United States joining us here in just a moment. As promised, we are now joined by the Attorney General of the United States, William Barr. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for making some time for us.
Sure, Buck. Glad to do it.
So we've got a lot of major law enforcement issues going on all across the country. Some are newer and some are more long-standing. I want you to address, to the degree you can, what's going on right now with federal assistance to cities in places like Portland with federal law enforcement deployments. Portland doesn't seem to be able to control things. Chicago also has had another night of looting, which isn't getting a lot of media coverage. Is there more cooperation going on? What's the status of federal assistance to these cities?
Well, Buck, there's essentially two kinds of things going on. They're very different in nature. One is an increase in criminal activity, the normal neighborhood crime, gang violence, things like that. And we've seen an upsurge in many cities of that after the attacks on the police and the demonization of police. And so in a number of cities, we've been stepping up and expanding our federal task forces that work shoulder to shoulder with the state and local law enforcement in going after the gangs and the violent criminals. So in Chicago, it's criminal activity, and what happened in Chicago is that some of the gangs organized a raid downtown for looting purposes, which is obviously just stealing. So that's the kind of thing that's going on in a number of cities. We have a program called Operation Legend, which is increasing our support to those cities that need the help, but also want the help and work closely with us. District attorneys and police chiefs and mayors who are willing to work closely with us, and we're having an impact. The kind of stuff that's going on in Portland is different. That is, ideological in nature. These are far left extremists who are violent and trying to use violence to achieve their purposes, which is to obviously create chaos that will in turn affect the political system. So this is driven by groups such as Antifa, and Portland is sort of the longest. The Antifa started there in the United States and have long been very active in that area.
Mr. Attorney General, have you were in this exact role before? Have you ever seen the unwillingness from some people in positions of authority? I mean, whether it's the mayor of Portland, different district attorneys, the unwillingness to work with federal law enforcement, and even it seems sometimes to turn a blind eye in the case of Portland to widespread criminal activity.
No, this is the first time I've seen this happen. On one level, this is the first time I've seen leadership of a political party, in this case the Democratic Party, not willing to condemn violence. They're silent as to violence. They're silent as to the burning down of attempts to burn down federal courthouses. And then many of the local leaders are silent on the violence and are trying to hide the violence, suggesting that there is no violence going on, that these are peaceful demonstrators. And a number of them are refusing to work cooperatively with the federal government. So, we have district attorneys in some jurisdictions that are not willing to do it. Now, by and large, still throughout the country, most are working very closely with us on law enforcement level, but in many places they're not. And Portland is a place where they're not. The mayor has prohibited the police from cooperating and working with federal law enforcement.
Mr. Attorney General, I also want to ask you about the Durham probe, because there's a tremendous amount of focus these days on the timeline here. When are we going to find out? I know there are going to be things that you can't say or things that are not yet even known or perhaps handed in to you about the Durham probe. But can you tell the people listening to this across the country right now that if it is your belief that if Durham finds pure, clear criminal activity, that he'd be willing to indict, or willing to request, rather, that there be an indictment, even if it means that there would be some political backlash?
I've made clear that what part of what he's doing is specifically seeing if any criminal laws were violated, and if they are, people will be held accountable. And I've also said that we are going to proceed with this investigation and not put it on hold right now during the election season. We're all aware of the calendar, and we're not going to do anything for the purposes of affecting an election. But we are trying to get some things accomplished before the election.
Is the Durham investigation in the latter stages?
I'm not going to comment. I'm just going to, there are some things we'd like to get accomplished before the election as soon as we can.
Fair enough. Also want to ask you about your opinion of the ongoing prosecution of General Flynn. There were the oral arguments earlier this week heard before the Court of Appeals en banc, all of them together, and this may keep going. You were involved in this case because of the decision to stop bringing a prosecution against General Flynn. Two things. One, have you ever seen this happen before where a judge, in this case Judge Sullivan, kind of continues a prosecution that the state, or rather in this case the federal government, the executive branch, does not want to happen? And what is really going on here, Mr. Attorney General?
Well, no, I haven't seen anything like it. I mean, up until now, it's been very clear, not just that decisions as to prosecution are solely vested in the executive branch, namely the Attorney General, but in the federal government, but also that there's absolute discretion as to whether or if a decision is made not to proceed with a case. That's really absolute discretion because there's no one else in a position to prosecute a case other than the executive. So, this is a very unusual situation, and the judge has been very outspoken about this case, and obviously is very invested in the case, and seems to want to keep it going. But I think I've had another U.S. attorney take a look at this case, get into all the evidence, and it's very clear that there's just a voluminous evidence that was never turned over to Flynn or Flynn's lawyers that show that the FBI did not believe he was a Russian agent, did not believe that he had lied, and that the basis for the interview was not linked to any bona fide investigative purpose that the FBI had. So given those factors, and the conduct of the FBI, I exercised my discretion to say we were not going to proceed with this case. And I think at the end of the day, that decision will stand.
Do you think that we're speaking to the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr. Sir, do you think that there is that the mechanisms are in place needed to reform the FBI, different aspects of the intelligence community? You and I both worked for the CIA at one point. Do you think that they're able to make sure that what we saw with the Russia collusion, I mean, I would call it a fantasy, and an ambush. Trump has called it a witch hunt, the president. Are they able to police themselves on this matter going forward? Why should we believe that this won't happen again, what happened to President Trump?
I do think there are going to have to be some changes and reforms made, and I don't think the election season, is the time to be doing that. So I'm keeping a careful watch on some of the things that I felt contributed to the abuses in the past. I know the director of the FBI also has a number of ideas as to checks and balances that can be put into the system. And we talk about this. In fact, I talked about it with him this morning, some ideas for putting additional safeguards in place. And I think once the political season is over, we'll move forward very aggressively to do what we can administratively within the executive branch to put additional safeguards in place. I'm not sure any statutory changes are necessary at this stage, but I think we can do a lot with administrative changes.
And before we let you go, is there any federal action that we might be able to expect on restoring some of the rights that seem to be in a permanent freeze situation because of the COVID-19 at the state level? There's a lot of arbitrary decision making, a lot of extension of deadlines, and certainly some what seem to me to be partisan decisions about who has First Amendment rights for what and when. Is the federal government going to take any actions here, any future actions to make sure that people's constitutional rights are respected even during the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, well, I've been, very active on this front, basically making the point that the Bill of Rights doesn't take a holiday, even during a crisis like a COVID crisis, and making sure that the rules that are put in place are reasonable, non-discriminatory, and so forth. They don't discriminate against religion, for example, and that any distinctions are reasonably based and narrowly tailored to achieve the government's legitimate purpose without putting undue burden on people's rights. So the way we've done that is we have entered some litigation going forward and have been successful in some places, but actually we've made most progress by writing letters to the governor suggesting we might bring litigation and pointing out why we have a problem with what they're doing. And in most cases, they've been changing their rules and following our advice. So we still are doing that. And as the situation goes forward, as things continue to develop, as therapeutics become better, as the incidence is reduced and so forth, there should be a corresponding change and loosening up of these restrictions. And if we see restrictions that are continuing that are not reasonably justified, we'll challenge them.
Attorney General Bill Barr, sir, thank you so much for your work and for your time here. We appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Buck. Thank you.
Is the country going far left, given who we see on the Democrat presidential ticket right now? There are people who are going to argue, no, these are establishment figures. There will certainly be some Republicans out there who are going to say that the country is, in fact, going far left. Liz Cheney is one of them. Play clip 5.
Congresswoman, is it going to be the strategy of the Republican Party to focus their efforts and attacks on his new VP pick, who many see as a very strong choice for him and a strong voice for his ticket? Or do you refocus those attacks back on Joe Biden himself?
Look, the choice of a vice presidential running mate is the first decision, the first important decision a presidential candidate makes. I think that those decisions ought to be made based on who is the best candidate. Joe Biden clearly decided that he was going to make a choice based on somebody's gender, based on their race, and based on his need to placate the very far socialist left of his party. And so I think this choice says a huge amount about him. We're going to be focused on that. And we're also going to focus very much on her, very much on what she stands for. And as I said, the race is going to be for those independent voters. It's going to be for people in those swing states, and her policies are simply completely inconsistent with what most Americans believe in and stand for.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little, because I know they're going to say that's Liz Cheney. She's right-wing, and she's a Republican, so of course and it is true, of course she is going to criticize she was going to criticize any of the VPs that Biden has, because we disagree with Democrats, right? Same thing with me. But if we look at whether or not it's fair to say that Kamala Harris is a particularly left-wing candidate, I think it's more important to see both Biden and Harris as malleable, as people who can be pushed, who can be molded, who will do what the consensus of their party wants them to do. And the Democrat Party is now, it's increasingly obvious to me, a far left party. I think it's obvious to all of us. A far left party. They want Medicare for all, which is really just socialist health care, right? We know this. Even more socialism in health care than we currently have. They want a Green New Deal. They want abortion for all 9 months of a pregnancy funded by taxpayer dollars and treated as a sacred constitutional right. They want open borders and amnesty. And when they say, oh, they don't want open borders, okay, they want people to have to check in before they come into America and get access to free, as in taxpayer paid for, health care and a whole range of other issues. So it's a far left party, folks. Right? We really should just... Oh, and being anti-law and order now. Being anti-law and order, because you see, the Democrats need to establish... We often talk about narrative in the current political discourse, which is troubling in itself in a lot of ways, because narrative is automatically the editorialized storytelling and compilation of facts that serve a purpose, right? Narrative is always has an effective propaganda, but one of the problems the Democrats have is that they claim to be the party of minorities, particularly of urban minorities, right? So people, black and Latino. Remember, other racial minorities are not really talked about by the Democrat Party the same way. It's always black and Latino. And so if you're Arab or Indian or Korean or Chinese, you're not of descent, I should say, from any of those places, or Korean American, you don't get the same treatment. The Democrat Party really, because they need 90% of the black vote to go for Democrats to win the national election. So what you have is a problem. You have these Democrat enclaves, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Baltimore, right? Go down the list. You have these Democrat-controlled political entities, cities or states, but mostly the cities we're focused on now, Seattle, Portland, where we hear from politicians constantly about how they're going to do more for the black community, how they're going to do more for the Latino community, or Latinx, which is fascinating to me because the only people I ever hear use the term Latinx, because they don't want to misgender anyone in the Latino community with the Latino, which would be masculine of a version of the word. I only hear white liberals use the term Latinx. I've never heard a Latino person in my life say Latinx. So I think that's interesting. Once again, white liberals, who is the worst political group in America? White liberals. The worst people in America in politics, white liberals, no question. But when you look at what's happened in these cities, white liberals constantly talk about how they want to do more for the black and brown community, and that they are doing more, that they're the party of, but there's really not a lot of improvement that they can point to. And in fact, there's continued decay and desperation and violence and economic feelings of being left behind. And Democrats need a narrative to blame that on something else. So what do? Oh, it's racism and it's cops. So they absolve themselves. They absolve all Democrat leadership for it. And they also absolve the communities themselves from having to look inward and figure out what's really going on here that could promote more stable families, better long-term prospects and a future within this community. No. It's much easier to just say Republicans are racist, Republicans are bad, and the police are bad and racist, right? To find external enemies to focus on. But the country is going to the left as it does all this. Even Clyburn says it. Play clip 4.
This country goes like a pendulum on the clock. This country doesn't move in a linear plane. It goes left for a while. It goes back right for a while. You saw this country go left and elect Barack Obama. It went back right and elected Donald Trump. This country is going back to the left. Now, I tell people all the time, wherever it goes, it passes through the center. It's going left to right, it goes to the center. Right to left, it goes to the center. So this country camps out in the center twice as much as it does the left or right. And this country started moving back to the center within months of having some experiences with Donald Trump.
This country's going back to the left, my friends. That's where it's headed right now.